Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. It's lovely to see you all as usual. And welcome to our First Wednesday program for February. First, I need to thank some people. Of course, our statewide underwriters, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, through the Vermont Department of Libraries, of course, Vermont Humanities Council, which brings us this wonderful program every month. Our series underwriter for Brattleboro is Chroma Technology, and our local underwriters are Against the Grain, Brattleboro Auto Body and Detailing, the Brattleboro Retreat, Everyone's Books, GPI Construction, New Chapter, the Richards Group, the Vermont Country Store, the William Wyndham World Affairs Council, and of course, your friends and mine, the Friends of Brooks Memorial Library, that make all of this possible and all of our programming and special events possible. So let's have a big hand for all this folks. And while we're at it and spreading the love around, February is Love Your Library Month. So we have Valentines that we have put on all of your chairs tonight. There are markers spread sprinkled throughout the audience, and we would love to know what you love about the library. We will be doing a special, fair disclosure, we will be doing a special display in the chamber window next week, and so we'll be putting those up so that everybody can see how much Brattleboro loves its library. And many of you have probably heard me tell this story before, but when I heard about this job and I wanted to come here and be your librarian, I spent a lot of time researching the job and talking to people in the community, and I would ask everyone, without telling them why I wanted to know, I would say, so tell me, what do you think about the library? And the worst thing anyone said to me was, oh, I really should go more. And so I thought, okay, this is awesome. So one of the things I really love about the library is the First Wednesdays lectures, and so tonight it's my pleasure to introduce, there she is, Ellen Kaplan. She is a professor of theater at Smith College, a Fulbright scholar, an actress, director, and playwright, so she can just do the whole shebang herself. Recently, she directed Turn of the Screw and The Tattooed Man for Silverthorne Theater, and performed in David La Sola's La Nieta del Dictador, touring to Puerto Rico and the Midwest. She has directed and performed in China, Israel, Costa Rica, and she has been a professor at Tel Aviv University. Ellen also works extensively with underserved communities and at-risk groups, offering workshops in writing and theater, including 8 years with arts and special education in Pennsylvania, and engaging with socially and emotionally disturbed children and teens, pre-GED literacy training, and with women in prison and death row inmates. And to show you just how broad her experiences are, she is currently directing The Magic Flute. Ellen.
Hi. In case anybody asks, I can't do anything else. I can do theater, but I can accomplish absolutely nothing else. So it's true. But anyway, hi. So I'm Ellen. That is a painting by a man named Lukman Ahmed. He is a Kurdish painter and activist. And I'll show you some paintings of his at the end as well, but he really speaks to the experience of the Kurdish people and the tragedy of the Kurdish people in many ways. And his sisters, his mother have been fighters, activists imprisoned, and he is a very well-known musician and painter, but it's there just because I love his work and his accomplishment is vast. I'm going to talk about the Kurdish people and the Yazidi people, who are a subset of the Kurdish people. Tell me also if can you hear me? Yeah, okay, and if I speak too quickly, which I do, you will tell me, all right? But what I'm going to talk about tonight is the kind of theater that I do with people's stories, specifically in Iraqi Kurdistan and hopefully in northeastern Syria, where I couldn't get into, and I hope to get into in May. I'll explain. And I'll tell you a little bit about the history and the context and the hopes of people who are struggling with the catastrophe that's happening in their part of the world, too. That Testimonies is the name of a play that I wrote based on interviews with Yazidi women who are in refugee camps. My larger project is about northeastern Syria, and I'll explain both. One is within the other. But oral history, these are works, verbatim theater they're called, but oral histories where I work with people telling their stories and then put it on stage. It's a documentary kind of theater. And these are overlapping stories. The women that I spoke with last March, a little less than a year ago, were women who were fighting ISIS, women who had fled from ISIS, women who had been enslaved by ISIS, and women who are attempting to build a new society. I interviewed women in New England, Kurdish women in New England, in Rhode Island, in New York, in DC, in Berlin, other places in Germany, ultimately in the Kurdish region of Iraq. And I'll show you maps to help us orient where this all is. And what has inspired me, what started this, which is what I'll explain, is Rojava. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Rojava. It's nobody. Okay, it's important and it's in the process of being destroyed, but I'll explain why it matters. These women are Syrian Kurdish refugees, Yazidi survivors, women formerly held by ISIS, and women building new communities. I want to read you something. I'm going to show you some pictures and read you a tiny bit that is from Nadia Murad's book. Nadia is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a Yazidi woman. She wrote a book, and she and others commissioned this play, Testimonies, that I wrote. So I want to read that for you, but let's just look. That's going into Rojava. That's women, men, refugees. Some of these are taken from the web, some of them are my own pictures. But let me read, while you're looking at that, let's go back and look at people. Let me read what Nadia wrote, okay. August 3rd, 2014. They arrived before the sun came up. For 2 weeks, my small village had been surrounded. They took the few weapons we had and promised they wouldn't harm us, but they lied. They said, convert to Islam or suffer the consequences. They sent word that we should gather at the secondary school. My mother said, pack a bag. We put on as many layers of clothing as we could stand in the heat. We burned our family photos in the courtyard. I thought, our past is ashes. A slow stream of people walked toward the school, soaked with sweat. I realized how small my village was. All of Kocha, her village, fit in the schoolyard. They forced the women inside, upstairs. It was so hot we could barely breathe. There was only the sound of our weeping. We watched as our men were loaded into trucks and driven away. A moment later, we heard gunshots from behind the school. My beautiful mother, who had lived through so much and never complained, sat on the floor with her head in her hands. The mother says, they've killed my sons. And Nadia continues, they lined up the men and made them climb into the ditches. They shot everyone and filled the ditches with dirt. Among those who died were 6 of my brothers. They took the women and children to another town. Much later, we found out all the older women were killed. The youngest boys were forced to join the terrorists. My nephew was 11 when he was taken. 3 years later, he called his mother to tell her he believes in the caliphate, in ISIS who killed his family. The girls were taken to slave markets to be sold. We had hoped to be killed like the men. As I said, she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. These are Yazidi women talking about the siege of Sinjar. This is what I want to contextualize to give some sense of who she is and why she's speaking. And why does it matter? Well, obviously, because these are women and men who are struggling with enormous amounts of trauma, with displacement, enslavement, genocide, families kidnapped and killed. These are tens of thousands of people. But it's stories, women's stories of resilience and recovery. Also, women's roles are changing dramatically. I'll tell you, I've been in Bosnia, I've been in Afghanistan, and watching what is happening to how women are really dramatically changing their lives is awe-inspiring. Also, because the Kurds, the Yazidi, the Christians who live there are vulnerable and stateless minorities. Ultimately, my interest was drawn by what I will explain. Rojava, I keep mentioning. Rojava is an experiment in radical democracy, in feminist empowerment, in ethnic inclusion, ecological sustainability, and Rojava is at risk. And tens of thousands of people are fleeing there to go to the very camps where I interviewed these women last year. And so I want to talk about that. But I do want to give you a quick sense of what this means for me. Who am I? I do normal theater, but I also do what's called applied theater. It means doing theater outside the building. It means taking theater to marginalized communities, underrepresented communities. She said, I work in prisons, I worked in Bosnia and Afghanistan. And the idea to me is that, in zones of conflict, on death row, I'm not interested in misery porn. That's what this sounds like. That's not what I am not here to say, well, look at all the horrors, but rather how people are building through this. Really, these are stories of resilience and struggle, and hope. I'm very interested in women's lived experience. What's life like now? But there's for me, a larger sense of what I think about here and now. Given the ecological catastrophe we face, new societal solutions are ever more important. What undergirds the experiments there is something called social ecology. Murray Bookchin, who somebody knows, right? Murray was for decades and decades, and I'll explain, but lived in Vermont, in Burlington, and his daughter's become my friend. He is extremely influential in a small area, but his is the work that inspires what's going on there. I know I'm pulling a lot of pieces. I'm going to try to make this coherent, I hope. And let me say how. Okay, him, Murray Bookchin. So there are three things about this project that got me interested. The first is that I knew Murray Bookchin, this guy, when I was really young, like 14 and 15 and 16. He was in New York, and I, with others, listened to, he had like salons at Vasilka, which is a coffee shop, and I was blown away. He talked about the Spanish Civil War, and I wanted to go, but of course it had happened decades before. I was like, wait, I'll go. It's like, no, I don't think so. He had a tremendous influence, and I kept reading his work. So you'll see why he's connected to this, but that was the first thing that intrigued me. The second thing is the Kurds specifically are a stateless people, and as a Jew with very complicated feelings about Israel and about what it means to need a state, and yet, yes, and I believe deeply we need states, stateless people are deeply vulnerable. But that goes for all stateless people. How do we resolve that? So I'm very interested in the Kurdish experience, and there's a lot. Kurds will talk to you about how much commonality they have with Jews. What does it mean in this world where we shouldn't have states at all? But to be stateless is to be deeply vulnerable too. So I don't know. And then women in traditional societies, I've seen in Bosnia, in Israel, Palestine, in Afghanistan, the enormous challenges that women face. And so I'm very drawn to stories of where women are really finding empowerment in their societies. So, and my question about Rojava is, it's a utopian project. Well, is it working? Okay, I'll go back to this, but what happened for me very specifically, I was doing my play based on writings from people from death row. In the audience at a talkback, a guy stands up and he says, well, wait, have you heard of this anarchist paradise in Syria? I'm like, what? And he says, no, really, the US is defending it from the skies. Right, it's an anarchist paradise. I had no idea what he was talking about, I was sure he's nuts. 6 months later, the lead story in the New York Times Magazine is about Rojava. And what is Rojava? It's a place inspired by Murray Bookchin. I'm like, what? And that's how I became, this is 2016, I began to learn everything I could about this fascinating and in many ways benighted project. It's not just simple, but I think I'm in the wrong slide. Who knows where it is? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Yeah, they're right. Okay. Rojava was inspired specifically by the writings of Murray Bookchin. Okay. Abdullah Öcalan, to explain this simply, is the leader of the PKK and the leader of the Kurdish nation, Kurdish people. Öcalan was arrested in Kenya in 1999. He has been on his own island in solitary confinement, him and 1,000 people guarding him, since then. He can see no one except his lawyer, but he can have books. And he read and came across Murray Bookchin's writings. And he said, I'm no longer a Stalinist, which he was. I'm no longer attracted to that kind of authoritarian structure. I want to be Murray Bookchin's disciple. So he wrote to, Murray's like 80 years old, and he gets this letter from this Turkish guy he'd never heard of, saying, I'm your student. I want to do whatever you say. I'm old, I'm cranky, I have arthritis, what do you want for my life? So they start a correspondence, and Öcalan has inspired the entirety of the Kurdish people. He is their leader, their spiritual, political leader. And he said, what we are going to do is develop a society in northeast Syria after the civil war. Assad pulled out his troops to fight the rest of the war, and it became possible for this area, the size of Connecticut, okay, it's not nothing, this area to develop its own autonomous governments, or communes actually. And it truly is a revolutionary project. Now there's a lot of history, and I won't go through all of it, although I'm happy to answer questions, but essentially since 2012, and then in 2014 there's a constitution that's written, what you have is a radical democracy based on the idea of communes, and then communes federate with other communes. Basically it's small, local, like town halls. I don't know how else to say it. That's what Murray would say was but these are small grassroots organizations that then federate and confederate with others. So the idea is that this is more autonomy than the Kurdish people ever had basically anywhere, certainly not in the 100 years of the 20th century. Okay, so, and I want to be careful. So Murray is known for, and speaks for, this is social ecology. What's social ecology? It's basically a theory, set of theories that say that our rapacious attitudes towards nature reflects the rapacious social structures under which we live. That the exploitation of, quote, resources is an extension of the exploitation of man by man. He basically critiques, and has for some 60 years, critiques the idea of hierarchy and dominance, and said that basically our ecological problems, as well as all our other problems, trace back to the structures we have that are based on dominance and exploitation. Okay, that's his basic theory. He's called an anarchist, but it's not lifestyle anarchism. It's not let's all be anarchists. He's very clear about self-governance. And it's about the community. So, as I said, he had tremendous influence on Abdullah Öcalan. Now I want to show, okay, and that's how his work got to northeastern Syria, yeah? I want to show you some maps. That is Kurdistan, okay? Now you'll look and it covers 5 countries, right? 4 countries, I mean it's Russia too, but it's basically Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran. There are people that up in the corner there, but that red represents the Kurds, the map of Kurdistan. Now, Rojava is the part of northern Syria. That is essentially the thing that I'm talking about to start with. You see Turkey? Well, Turkey, just so you know, so Turkey in January of 2018 attacked and overran Afrin, so that is cut off from the rest. They are now, and have been, moving all along the northern border there to create a corridor. And so, whereas this all had been Rojava, this is cut off, the US withdrew from over here, and I want to get to the stories, but I want you to know where they take place. So I don't want to belabor this, but a little bit more so you see. So that's Rojava. This is Iraq and Syria, okay? I hoped to go to Kamishli and down here. This is Al-Hasaka. I had an invitation from a local, and many women, I was to go. Because of the fighting with ISIS, every border was closed. I was denied permission. So instead, I went with my photographer, and we went to Dohuk, if you can see, and Mosul and Erbil, Howler, it's called, that whole, and went there to the refugee camps. You can see the oil fields in Kirkuk, and ISIS had gone as far as Mosul. So, and we'll talk about that, but it's this area where the camps are. And I think the next thing is, okay, that's that's Syria, and then Al-Hasaka, Raqqa, and this is Howler is what I know, Erbil, very close to Mosul. In fact, Erbil was less than 15 minutes drive from where ISIS had been, and had been horrifyingly not too long ago. But this now is quite a thriving area. Zakho, Dohuk, Erbil, Suleimania. That area is where the refugees from Syria, many tens of thousands, have gone. It's also where there are camps of tens of thousands of ISIS. Okay, I'm getting to the people in a minute, but those are some of the camp locations. Go back and look. And very big, quickly, just for context, there are 30 million Kurds worldwide, mostly, as I said, in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Iran's not really part of this story. They have their own problems, but it's a very fractious history. The Kurds were a buffer between the Ottoman and Persian empires, and relatively independent. There were emirs, emirates, but there was supposed to be a Kurdish state. After World War I, the European powers carved up everything, and they said, great, Kurds, here's a state. That's Treaty of Sèvres. And then, because Ataturk came and basically said, forget it, in 1923, they went back on that. So now there's no Kurdish state. That's the Treaty of Lausanne. Basically, what I found in all the people I spoke to is it's undeniable. The Kurds have been denied cultural rights, political rights, stripped of citizenship. There's a cultural genocide. They're not allowed to use their language. I tell you, the letters Q, W, and X are illegal because they don't exist in Turkish language. The thing that most hit me was meeting a little girl, 11-year-old girl in Berlin, outside Berlin, who said, we had to leave. They called me an eyesore because I was Kurdish. I mean, the discrimination on, obviously, political rights are refused. Citizenship has been denied, but that kind of harm that is done at that level, I heard those stories over and over again. What to do? All right, so, almost finished with all this. The Syrian civil war, I said, started in 2012. In 2014, what is now called, they keep changing the names, the AANES, the Administration of Autonomous Things in Northeast Syria. Anyways, Rojava. That was declared in 2014. 2019, last year, what I just said, the final battles with ISIS, and then we were denied entry because of that. Okay. So, that's enough of that, but, all right. So the Kurds were horrifically persecuted under Saddam. They were pawns between Iran and Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s. You've heard of Chemical Ali. Well, thousands and thousands died in his attack. It's called the Anfal. There's a museum in Suleimania against it. And families fled to the mountains. The people I met, my friends, their homes were burned. They froze. They starved. My friend's sister was born on the mountain and died on the mountain. I mean, she was a few months old. So these are people who left their homes over and over again in Iraq, in Iraqi Kurdistan, okay? Gulf War, and we can talk more about this. I'm afraid I don't want to get you bogged down, but basically, Iraqi Kurdistan has 5 million people. They host 2.5 million refugees, okay? I don't know, I feel just that way. This is a picture of Erbil, which is now a thriving town. It wasn't, it went through severe crises. There was a civil war between two factions in Iraqi Kurdistan. There was a terrible economic crisis in 2013, but it is now thriving. So, it's a market, more market, and that's my dancing guy, That's Barzani, and what that picture is he's no longer, he's stepped down. His son is now the prime minister, I think it is, or the president of Iraqi Kurdistan. But there are checkpoints all over, and I find this hilarious because there's a picture of him going, yay, I love being at this checkpoint, but everywhere, like every 10 minutes, because there's still a great deal of danger there. One of Saddam's prisons, which dot the place, and then the camps, which is what essentially I want to talk about, okay? Most of these pictures I took, some are from other sources, the Red Cross, but this was a picture. Most of the women are not dressed, most of them are secular, but there are also many non-ISIS women who are still traditional. And another picture, and a tent. So, this woman, Galray, hello, where are you? Okay, that's her home actually. I'm looking for the teddy bear. So, for example, okay, the women I speak with, most have no memory, no direct memory. They can't remember what life was like before. Before the camp, before ISIS, it's too painful. And this is common. Memories, none. They don't remember, they don't cry, and they say, or I never stop. There's a woman, I don't know where she is. Oh, these are also women I met, but, and this is another, I'll get to it. One of the women, I think I passed her picture. Galray is pregnant. Her son and her husband she has left. The other kids, and she had many, are lost. What she wants is a normal routine. She wants to be what we call a housewife, and that's what she wants. She wants to go back to, she's a traditional woman. And the picture that I don't see had her, this is somebody else, had the son kept with him one thing, which was the teddy bear. There's a real desire, you know, I come in with a liberated woman, oh, don't you want to, no, I mean, what I want is I want the life I had, I barely remember, but I want predictability and comfort and safety, and that made enormous sense to me. That wasn't everyone, but there's certainly many women for whom that was important. A normal routine she wants for herself and for her daughters too. But the roles, as I said, are changing because in many cases there are no men. So the women have to do work that they didn't do before. The women have to start wearing pants when they go into the fields and take on roles that they didn't do. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's not a bad thing either. It's an is, if that makes sense. It's what you have to do. Women have to head the family. And there are generational changes. This is Naza, okay? I'll tell you her story. I don't know where the others went, but Naza, she lives right outside one of the camps, as many people do. She had 9 kids. They were all kidnapped. She was away at her brother-in-law's, another town over, when her husband and the 9 children were kidnapped. And when she came back, they were gone. She hiked for 3 hours. She didn't get back, but she went onto the mountain. She said she hiked for 3 hours with nothing. Turns out she was pregnant. She didn't know that it was early pregnancy. And she tried, she lived on the mountain, and I should explain that Sinjar is where the Yazidi people live for the most part. Yazidi are or not ethnically Kurd. It's just the way there are French who are Catholics and Protestants. They're Kurdish, they speak Kurdish, but they're not necessarily ethnically Kurdish. They're a specific group of people with a specific history, religion, and they are considered as kafir, as infidels by extremists, not by most Muslims, but by the extremists. So the Yazidi were forced into up the mountain, which is where they live and protects them. I don't know if you remember, but Obama did a lift to save them, to, what's it called, an airlift. But many people were slaughtered. Many people had to live with nothing in the cold on the mountain. And they've now found mass graves all over the place. But this is the Yazidi people who are still struggling. Most of the people I talked to in this round were Yazidi. This woman is. Anyway, her daughter, she tells us her whole story. Her daughter was a sex slave, basically from 12 to 16. I wanted to read you one tiny little thing, if I can find it quickly. It's one of the things. I have too much. I just want to give you a sense. But after 4 years, smugglers contacted her. She says, You are welcome on my head. I am from Kojo. When Daesh, which is ISIS, came, I was not at home. I was going to a funeral in Shimon. My family tried to escape, but they were captured. My husband, my children, 4 girls and 5 boys. I was alone. I was running like a sheep, looking for my children all over the place, but I didn't find them. And she goes on to tell the story, which is essentially smugglers, which is how people get their kids back. Smugglers contacted her. They said, a total of $13,000. The Iraqi Kurdish government helps with that money, although you're supposed to pay them back to redeem the child. She did. She got the money. She got the girl back at 16, and the girl died a few days later. And the relatives who had also given money towards this were furious. Why not rescue the boys? Why'd you rescue the girl? And look what happened. Well, the girl was obviously treated brutally, and why she died, was it a heart failure, was this something congenital, or was it a result of the treatment? There's no way of knowing. But she did get back 2 of her boys. But the boys, young boys, I've met them, they're there, are so aggressive, they're traumatized. They're so aggressive, her own brother said, get out of the house, I can't keep you here. And that's why she's here. And there's a little girl too who doesn't speak. This, I'm not going to tell you all, but these are the play. Actually, we use ghosts, we use poetry, but the stories at the core of it are this is what happened to these women. There's the teddy bear out of order. Okay, anyway, it's inside of a tent. And these young gals and those guys, this was on the outskirts of one of the camps, and they were great, and the girls were talking, and they served us tea, the mom served us tea. But when it came to talking politics, the men all came over, and only the men talked politics. They talked it very loudly. They were very happy to talk about it, but the girls stopped. But the kids had been playing with kites, and I asked the girls, well, do you want to go play with kites? No, we can't. So even these, and they speak some English, they have dreams, but the simplest things that we would accept, yeah, play with kites. It's a very different social order and in a huge transition. This is Rwanda, which is a gorgeous part of the country, also Iraqi Kurdistan. And this is Mr. Taha. Just as an example, he and his family have been here for 200 years. They fled 3 different times. Their house was burned down 3 different times. They've left with nothing, came back and rebuilt. It's a lovely house. Mrs. Taha, do I have your picture? No, that's Mr. again. And that's Lalish, we'll get to him. But Mrs. Taha, I think I don't have her picture, but this is a gal. She went to school until she was 13, secretly, because she wasn't supposed to. But then they married her off to him, and he's a great guy. But she got married at 13 and had 11 kids. And she's a lovely woman. But this is, she wished she could have stayed in school. But let me tell you about her kids. Some are married. One stays home with her. What's her name? Sharia. And she does the cooking and caring for the parents. That's what she does. My friend, how I met them, is my friend is a doctor, Haja. Oh, it's hilarious. I say, Haja, do you want to have kids? I hate kids. I'm like, how can you be that? But she's wonderful. She is like most of the people I met, moderate, modest, secular-ish, but they're these are Muslim women and men. But in no way are we talking about the kind of fanatics that have attacked. It's just normal people. It so happens she and her husband both are doctors. They've moved to Germany part-time, maybe for a few years, and then they'll come back. But that opportunity and seeing the distance between my very traditional Mr. Taha and his wife, and his daughters, I just met Sharia, the one who takes care of them, who is covered, and mom is covered, and Haja, who is out in the world, and there's a great deal of harmony there. That's fine, that's your chore, that's your chore. And it was really very inspiring to see that there was no rancor. We talked at a great length, we spent quite a bit of time with them, how lovely that Haja and her husband are doing what they do, and how lovely that Sharia is here taking care of us, and our many, many grandchildren. I'm not making a point so much, just saying what I found was a wide range of experience, and I'm fascinated by that. Aveen, I don't have a picture of her, but she, who's from Amuda, which is in Rojava, she says her father only came home every 3 years. He worked in Libya and Algeria, Dubai, it was part of his job. But her mother, she said, she left us when I was 10. I said, where'd she go? And what she meant was that she passed away. And so Aveen took care of the family while father was traveling. But then she went to the university. And she still, to this day, supports her sisters at home in Amudat. But her uncles and cousins, many of them shun her because of, and she also covers, by the way, these are not wild, radical disco dancing. She's a modest young woman who works for an NGO and who has ambition to work in other countries and other places and increase her education. Her father is supportive, and she still supports, as I said, her siblings, but uncles and cousins shun her. There's a lot of upheaval, change, and it's hard to absorb that in one generation. And then I want to tell you, and then I'll finish up, but a little bit about Lalish. That is Baba Chawik. This is Suhail. He was my fixer, and he's wonderful. He's the guy, he's 24, who said his sister, an infant, died on the mountain. But he came with us to the temple, Lalish, which is the center of, it's the spiritual center of the Yazidi people. The first thing that Baba Chawik said to me to us is, we are tired, we are broken, there is nothing left. He took us inside the temple, which is 4,500 years old. He explained that his people have suffered, they will all tell you, 73 genocides. Let me tell you just briefly, before I show you some pictures of the temple itself, about this. The Yazidi people, the religion is syncretic, meaning it takes and combines from many traditions. It's based in Zoroastrianism. It's also from some pagan, what you call pagan, and also Islamic traditions. They are a nature-worshipping people. When you go into the temple, I think I have a picture, you see a snake. Because what's the snake? And the snake, yeah, I don't know if I have it. The snake is the snake that plugged up the hole in Noah's Ark. There is a real embrace of multiple traditions. And that's fine for many of their Muslim neighbors, but not all. And ISIS attacked them very specifically, and they are the targets as being pagans, which they're not. It's a monotheistic religion, by the way. And we were talking about the peacock angel, and I can talk more in detail about it, but essentially it is an ancient practice that worships nature. We were talking about ecological disaster, and Baba Chawik said there's one answer: everybody should plant one tree for every birthday they have. Makes sense to me. Anyway, he was telling us very much about what it means not to be able to return to the mountain, that everything's gone. The Yazidi girls captured on Mount Sinjar were sold and resold and forced to convert, taught to hate their own family, losing their own language. But there's a real question, and this is one of the things. I realize I'm far from Rojava. I hadn't gone there yet, I will. But it's the same forces, a tug between tradition and modernity. But one of those things, and it's really, I saw it in Bosnia, I saw it in Afghanistan, if you are raped, it's your fault. You can no longer come back to the community. Now, because they are facing, the Yazidi people are facing basically extermination, that's changed. The council, the higher council said, all right, we will accept the women back, but not their kids. Now what do? You have a child. You stay with ISIS or in those camps, or do you come back, but you can't bring your child? And it is over and over, we talk to people who had to face this. And it echoes what I interviewed women in prisons in Afghanistan, in Herat. And before that, I wrote a piece about Bosnia. Those are the two places where I spoke with women who were struggling with what it is, this difference between tradition and modernity, and what does that mean in terms of your body and your actual life. That became not what I intended for this first part of the project, but this became the center of what I was writing about. Does that make sense? I still want to go to Rojava. I'm hoping that it still exists. But the idea of slaves, sex slaves being reintegrated into society without their kids, leave your child behind, is such an enormous, wrenching dilemma. Well, okay, this is Lalish, the triangle thing, so it's like a prayer stone. This is inside, And it's very dark inside, but we had a couple of lights in this place. There are different traditions that I really liked. You take colored cloth, these jewel-colored cloths, and you throw them. If they stay up on the ledge, then you get your wish. Now, please understand, I went with a professional photographer. He took amazing pictures. I don't feel, I'm not ready to, he's not ready for me to show his pictures. So these are the pathetic little pictures I took. But to give you a sense of what this place was like, these are urns for olive oil that they tell me go back for thousands of years. That's the inside right after the urns. And then this is leaving. This actually is one of Paul's photos. But so I'm going to wrap up, but I want to say that the young Muslim women that I met, some were secular, some embraced moderate aspects of their culture, but most of them did not accept the limited horizons that were on offer. And this is the women I met in the refugee camps, many of whom came from extremely traditional homes, but circumstances have changed so much. And they have friends, neighbors, people who work nearby, social workers, who are of their community, but are more educated and more out in the world. One of the translators we worked with, Khalida, is a Yazidi woman, and she is a psychotherapist, of whom there are about 3 in the whole camps. I mean, there really is not much. There's a huge issue of mental health, real problems with that. Trauma, and in societies where you don't talk about trauma, with very few services for trauma. So Khalida introduced us to many women who wanted to talk, but are still constrained by bringing issues in front of their own community. It was easier to talk to strangers. But what she and the other people we worked with talked about, the tremendous need for mental health services and education, which stops pretty early on. And for opportunities, people don't have transportation out of the camp, so they can't work. And on and on. The thing is that you're talking about situations that are very, very challenging and not the resources to deal with them. Now, very, very quickly, I still hope, I expect to go to Rojava. I'm working with people, I have the invitations. It's just that I can't swim there. I've got to be let in. So Fish Kabul was closed. But the reason that I'm so inspired by this, because here's a place right across the border from these guys where there are women who are 50% of the leadership, women who are running around in trainers, in sneakers, and fighting. It's not that I idolize women fighters, it's not that, but to look at the difference between women who basically said, we are going to take our future into our own hands. There are a lot of problems in Rojava. I don't think it's an anarchist paradise. I've spoken to many, many people who have left there. And what there is some combination of yearning and cynicism. And I have a friend in Berlin who is Kurdish, the painter, his sister, very fun, and she said, I'm not going to stay there and be fuel, in other words, in the war, for these other people. I've got a life to live. And I get it. There are others who say the bureaucracy and the paperwork and a whole bunch there are a lot of things that are not great about Rojava from my outsider's point of view. On the other hand, there are many people I talked to in Iraqi Kurdistan said, yeah, but we face corruption and essentially no vision. It's a place of vision. And so I want to see, what does that mean? Is it working? Does it work at all? How do you make an ecologically sustainable, inclusive, my God, to say, yes, all ethnicities, all religions are welcomed here. That's the vision. I don't know how successful or not. I probably, 45 minutes. Oh, wait, come back. That's one of the camps we visited. I think that's Paul's picture. That's another, I think that's a view from Erbil. But this is a picture of Lukman Ahmed. He is prolific. That's a horse. His pictures are very dynamic. But beyond that, come back. No. A woman of my country. And I just want you to leave you with that image. I think his work is extraordinary. He is quite a powerful artist. And there's much, of course, to say. There are laws, the Kurdish region itself, moderate, progressive, but very few women drive cars. Nobody walks alone, no women. The cafes are segregated. It is certainly way progressive across the border now in Kurdish Iraq. What's happening in Syria I can only, again, I talk to friends, I talk to many people there, I talk to people who have relatives there. It's under siege. And so whatever's been built is endangered. And that's all I know. I know, though, that I have the means to go. I intend to go because I want to write about what I hope has some hope of success. I was too late for the Spanish Civil War, so what can I do? Anyhow, that's basically, I would like to ask you to address questions or to talk about whatever interests you. I can go on forever, you don't need me to, but I'd love to hear what your responses are to what I've said. And thoughts?
I have microphones.
Oh, good. I'm interested in the discrepancy between the ideal of a grassroots democracy and the rather, it's also hierarchical, the people who are running it, and it's still a Leninist structure, and it's, in a lot of ways, there's no room for rivals. This is what we believe. If you believe something else, see you later. I mean, so it's a mixed bag. I would love to hear opinions, thoughts. Yeah, sir.
Spoon. I'm sure you have thought a lot about whether it's necessary to be reduced to such a basic life and a life of deprivation and suffering before a people, a community can begin looking at new and radical ideas for rejuvenating.
Oh, what a great question. Yes. Let me say, next week or in 2 weeks, I'm inviting Debbie Bookchin, who's Murray's daughter and who travels the world speaking about the issues in Rojava. Debbie is going to give a talk and join us for a colloquium on social ecology. But that's a central question. How do we get from where we are, megalopolises and megacities and all, how do you move towards any kind of structure that is humanitarian, that's open, that is not this kind of aggressive world we live in? How? You know? And so yes, I don't know. I certainly don't want to think that we have to face civilizational collapse to get to a kind of, but I have no answers. You were going to say, what do you think? Yeah, no, I certainly don't know. And think about it. And what's your response to this question? I'll come back to you.
Well, I've always hoped that it was not so. I mean, every once in a while in world history, you see something happen, like the American Revolution and the emergence of our Constitution and our democracy. But it was compromised from the beginning, and it's not looking like it's going to work in the long run. So where else? I'm always looking for examples somewhere.
So Murray spoke a lot about the Paris Commune, not the French Revolution, which soon began to eat its own, but the Paris Commune, where the people went on the street and basically, it was a revolutionary moment. It lasted about a minute, 1789 or 80, I forget. But the Spanish Civil War, there were these little pinholes of opportunity. People think Rojava is one, but you're right. I mean, is that because you have total disruption? Look, I spent a lot of time in China. And boy, talk about a revolution gone sour. I mean, to me, what's there is horrible. I mean, it's great. People have been lifted out of extreme poverty, and that's great. But there are a lot of, so the thing is, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, except that there's some hope that's saying, hey, we're facing, look, Syria's civil war started in part because there was a terrible drought. There are ecological underpinnings to the issues that face us. I hope that doesn't mean we have to get to a point of severe deprivation and collapse, but we've got to face these issues. They're right around the corner from us. By us, I just mean Vermont, Northampton. I mean, you know, we're all facing this. I don't know, but that is a big question. And do you have any thoughts? Can you save us?
I can't say.
No, I know, but what are you thinking, if I may?
I think we are in civilizational collapse. I think we are in civilizational collapse. And where communities have gotten together is usually under circumstances where it's things are falling apart. Like Sandy, people come together, help each other.
That's right.
And also, like, look at small, I don't know what exists anymore outside of capitalism. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But like Bhutan, where they measured happiness.
Yes.
These were people, I hate to say third world countries, fuck that, excuse my French,
No, no,
but they had happiness. We don't have happiness, we have too much junk.
That's right.
And everyone's just looking for more and more money. So until capitalism, I mean, you cannot have capitalism without slavery.
Right.
You can't have rich people without having poor people and slavery.
Right.
It's impossible.
Grow or die. That's the ethos behind capitalism.
Yeah,
And
I know.
you can't,
You have to
right?
keep growing, so it's not sustainable.
No.
But no one wants to let go of what they have because everyone's living in fear. And there's just too many people on the planet.
I know.
That's also, so there's limited resources, obviously, and I don't know. The whole thing's just going to collapse, and
But it's horrible to hope for that because that means, I know what you're saying, but that also means incredible death and
there's
destruction.
going to be horrible
Yeah.
suffering. I mean,
Yeah.
there is horrible suffering,
Yeah.
and it's going to get exponentially worse.
I know.
I think it's inevitable. When people get wiped out, I mean, lots and lots and lots of them, the earth will survive
Well,
and it will rebuild somehow.
There is a way I think, and I don't know if it's of any use, and I think it was I saw you respond to, yeah, I definitely believe there needs to be an Israel, but I also believe there doesn't need to be any nation state. So what does that mean? And I'll explain why that connects to this. To my mind, the only solution, and by the way, the people that I met in this area of the world agree, the only solution is regional, and there's no Israel-Palestine, it's nonsense. You must have a regional solution, but part of that has to be, how do we adequately deal with resources for everybody? How do we have hospitals and water? My God, the water crisis is enormous. You can't move forward. There's no forward movement there unless you start saying, how do we work together systemically, the entire lot of countries around here, to say, we need to deal with the serious crisis of water. We need to deal with an equitable distribution because we're all going to die if we don't. I really do believe that everybody needs. I don't believe in nation states in the long run, but I also see how vulnerable. I did work with gypsies, Roma, before this. I did that. People without protection in this world are incredibly, horribly burdened. What do? We can't. Nation states nowadays don't say, oh, sure, we'll just give you one and you give it. They don't do that. But if we could find, and again, I'm an actress, what do I know? But what I believe is that some sense of on the ground, all right, you need water, I need water, let's figure it out. That seems to me the only path I can imagine going forward. Sir, yeah.
Okay, yeah, since you didn't actually make it to Rojava yet, I don't know how much of this you can say, but
Yeah.
I'm really curious about some of the social and ecological patterns that they have been evolving towards, and this gets into the positive side of things.
Yes.
What are they actually doing there that's working?
I can talk a lot about that, actually.
And what are the processes that they're using to get there? Because that's, I think, really what
So,
we can be inspired by.
no, thank you, that's so much, and you're right, they are doing things. Here's what I know, as an outsider, but I've done a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, and I have some idea of what's happening, a lot actually. What has been happening is you have a lot of small industry. You have bakeries and you have very small industries and farms where people are working on we together make a collective to create the immediate needs. That is structured into what they're doing. There is no large industry. There's no McDonald's. I mean, and that's by law. They have a constitution. It's not the basic law, I forget what it's called, but there are laws that basically say we are not inviting in large industry or conglomerates. We are creating this on the ground. And apparently it's working. I mean, this is like, I know this is going to sound silly, but the comparison to me is Costa Rica. I had a Fulbright there, I lived there, and there was, 30 years ago, but there was a lot, everybody was lower middle class. Everybody, it was great. That's what I understand. Wealthy people have left. That's fine. I mean, I have nothing against wealthy people per se, but what I'm getting at is that at least for now, from the reports from there, this is about not accumulating capital, but working on smaller. Again, is that a be-all and end-all? No, I met a small businessman who had to leave because the people who were in the PKK were taking over. They were using his gas, and they were using his truck, and they were taking over for the revolution his material goods. I mean, is that good? The guy was a small businessman, but I have no opinion, but there are certainly people who don't like this. On the other hand, there's also international support. I spent a few days with oh God, what are they called? He's a university professor, but it's in Germany. It's in something with an H. I have to look it up. But whatever it is, it's a university not too far from Berlin. And what they do is they are shipping, because the Assad people dynamited the dam. And so there was no electricity. And so this group, it's an ecological group, and I'm forgetting, but it is a left-wing ecological group in this humdinger, you'll forgive me, I could look it up and send it to you. But what they did is they have been shipping and waiting, because the border is often closed, but shipping materials so that the dam got back to working, so there was electricity. I mean, there were serious. This is not like a place to move like if you want a vacation. This is not Hawaii. It's a struggle. But what I gather is if you buy into this, and not everybody does, it is really an effective and sincere effort to have, and a working effort to have everybody essentially, I don't want to say taken care of. It's not that everybody contributes, at least as I understand. Much of the stuff that I've read and the people I've talked to are academics, and then people who have family there, and it's a pretty broad range of people, will say, if you buy into this, and there are like neighborhood committees, and the PKK representative is the head of it. That's what it is. And if you don't buy into it, you don't get the stuff that you should get. I mean, there are things that are not kosher. They're not, I wouldn't like it, you know, I mean, that kind, and those are what people have complained about. There's not a lot of room for ideological dispute. But given that, there's lots of room for people to live pretty much to have basic needs taken care of, education taken care of, security taken care of, and people taking care of their own administration. So this small commune that's us, right, we decide what we want to do. We're the block association, and then on a rotating basis, we send a representative to a larger confederation of communes. And so there's a real effort not only at grassroots democracy, there really is, and at taking care of the basic needs of people. Is it perfect? No. Do people, young women go, I don't like all this, I have to report to this one, I have to tell this one. I get it. But I also get that, and ecologically, there really is written into the Constitution, which is not called that, but in 2014 they made a document, and it's written in that there is a real sustained effort towards ecological sustainability. That's all I know. All I know is secondhand, I can't wait to go. I'm dying to go. I really want to. I volunteered because I want to teach there, but this is not a good time. They go, great, you're an old woman, go home. So they didn't. But the thing is that there really is an active society there that's doing something wonderful, except when Trump, pulled out of Manbij our 50 troops, but for the 50 troops, by pulling out, he basically said, go ahead to Turkey and Russia. And that's a disaster. And as Turkey came in, it's undoing this stuff. And I am waiting to talk to Debbie, she was there, and see if we can't go together. But I don't know. Does that answer it all? That's all I know. This person, somebody, yeah, hi.
Hello. Recently, I heard on BBC World Service, I think, on Vermont Public Radio.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Yes, I heard that the Yazidi are losing their heritage,
Yes.
and they don't have a lot of written records, or
That's right.
maybe none. But one thing that they are trying to regain is the musical heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that records of that music is being put in a library in Oxford to be saved. And I was wondering if you had anything,
Yeah, a couple of
any
things.
knowledge of that?
First of all, the people that I worked with, one of them, different groups helped me, which was great. Seeds is an organization, I think it's just Seed, no S. They are based in Howler, in Erbil, same place, and in Hook. They do psychosocial services and a number of other things with the refugee community. But one of the efforts, they actually have a calendar with beautiful pictures to sell because they want to get more funding to exactly that, to get translations of heritage, of stories. I didn't know about music, I'm sure that's part of it. They are doing that by sending people in. So basically there is an attempt, what I know is stories, local history, but I'm sure that music would be part of that. But the other part of that is there's a woman that I'm working with who's Irish, she's wonderful. She has been collecting translations of Yazidi poetry, and both by men and women. And there is certainly, because as far as I can tell, there isn't, where there is a Kurdish written tradition, even that is spotty. There's a lot not written down, but there's nothing for the Yazidi people. So that's great about Oxford. I didn't know that. Actually, the woman who is my helper, she's British, and her background is so incredible. I've forgotten it all, but I'm not surprised that there is a connection to Oxford. But yes, there is an effort, but not a lot of people. I mean, I'm thrilled that you've all heard of Yazidi. It's just not on people's radar. But this certainly, Seed is doing this, and the Jesuit services of, I forget where, also helped me. And there are people who are trying to capture some of the heritage. The poetry is contemporary poetry. There's also a woman in Boston-ish, Diane Edgecombe, who has done tremendous, she does performances and also wrote a book of Kurdish folk tales, and she does performances based on that. And she spent 7 years going through the hills and collecting stories that were not collected. So there is some attempt, it's not a lot. Did that answer a little? Okay, sure. More? Anybody? Yeah.
I'm just curious more, sorry.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little more about the theater aspect of
Yes.
what you're doing?
Sure. Okay, so basically, I am, as she said, this is what I do. I teach theater, I act. I don't act anymore, but a little, and direct. But long ago, like 30 years ago, I was playing Mother Courage, actually, and it felt to me that I was swallowed up. It was in Poughkeepsie at the Bardavon, it's a big opera house theater. And that was great, except it felt like the impact of it dissipated before you got out the door. So this is this incredibly political play, and and I felt this has zero impact on anybody. And so from then I actually started doing work. About a third of the work I do is outside the theater. So Death Row, well, that's its own story, but basically I've done a number of plays in communities. We did Hometown Tales, which was just oral histories in Orange, Massachusetts, or I've worked with literacy a lot, and special ed kids. But because of that, I started wanting, because I write plays, I write normal plays, but just with that I write, but I wanted to combine the work I was doing outside the building and to bring it onto the stage in a more formalized situation. I was invited into Bosnia by a group of women who were Croat and Muslim and the other guy, Serb, and they had an embroidery collective and they wanted their story told. And that was really fun, and that was one thing. The death row thing, I'll tell, because I have worked in prisons, but I've had a lot of physical ailments, like a lot, and I'm not a good person to have bed rest at all. And I spent months and months in bed, and I thought, who could be more depressed than me? So seriously, and I have a friend who'd been trying to get me to work with someone she worked with on death row, and she said, you must hear his story. And I said, yeah, well. And out of that, I began to make friendships, really, for my own soul. I needed to talk to people, and out of that came the notion of that I didn't write, I invited. I asked questions and invited and created a piece that wove together the monologues, the poetry, the stories of people. And then I added a character who was me. I mean, she wasn't, but it was me, the response to that. And which was very profoundly physical. I felt it. Anyway, but the point is, it's come out of my own needs and my own experiences. It's a natural extension of what I do, which is I do theater, but I wanted to do something And so too, I love the magic flute, I really do. It's not, I mean, this is part of my life, but I also believe that everyone has stories to be told. And I have a position that can help me to do that. So that's it. Does that answer? Good, yeah. Yeah. Hello?
What is happening with the children that you mentioned?
Oh, all right, so that's a great question. From what little I know, the insight I have, but first of all, the kids who were held by ISIS, and this is many thousands, deeply, deeply traumatized. We're talking about, from 5 years old to 13-year-olds, they're younger and older, but essentially. I can't say anything wonderfully hopeful. It's just not. There are also the kids who are still in the ISIS-held camps, another horror. But there are efforts, UNICEF in particular, but other groups, to educate, to offer educational alternatives within the camps. The problem is those end. And the girls say, I can't keep going to school, I have to take care of my family. And the boys say, what's the point? I'll never get a job. So it's not like this is a great thing. On the other hand, there is, like the girls I showed you who couldn't play kites, right? But they are anxious to join the world in the sense of, they're living on the outskirts of a refugee camp, but they're learning English, they're learning skills, and they have ambition. These kids, they want to go out. Will they all have opportunities? Well, probably not, but some will. And the NGOs hire, they do. There's a path out for kids. Many of the women I met really said, I can do this, I can be of service, and I can learn, and I can go to other countries. So it's a mixed picture, and I don't have a full picture. I only know the ones I met, but I do know that, yeah, it's dismal, but there are alternatives. There's a place, I showed you a couple of pictures, but there's a clinic in one of the camps, and it's run by a woman, she's the nurse there, and she runs it, but she lives in the camp. Her husband, they have a car, so he can get to work. If you don't have a car, you have trouble. On the other hand, she attends, and the clinic, my friend is a doctor who brought me there, their health issues are being taken care of in that camp. There is an attention to sports activities and to education. There's not sufficient means, but there's a little. I wish I had better to say, but that's something, right? The hardest is the trauma, yeah.
Are they growing their own food? Can they grow their own food?
That's, okay, so there are fields.
Water, irrigation?
There's water that gets trucked in. And the women in the camps, what I saw was water in cisterns, whatever they're called, and you fill your bucket and you carry it, or somebody carries it. So a big bucket of water comes in trucks. Food. The fields around the several camps I went to are fallible, plowable, they can grow things. And so, right, tomatoes and things, and people do. But it's not enough. I mean, at least what I saw, there were crops. They had tomatoes and a couple of other things, but they are dependent on the relief services. So yes, and yes, people also sell what they grow. The people were onions, tomatoes and onions were what they were growing. I don't understand enough about the economy, but I do know that was not enough to sustain the camps, but there's food. And there are, I didn't see some, yeah. You know, now that you say that. No, you're right. I mean, that's true. I mean, I'm such a city girl. I know nothing. I see a chicken, I go, look, oh, it's a chicken. But you're right, there are. But I didn't see at any rate. There were goats, but I didn't see anybody slaughtering goats. I didn't see, well, cows, forget. But there are a lot of sheep and a lot of chickens. And I know so nothing about what you do on a farm. I just don't know. But I do know that they were dependent on food coming in from outside. That I can tell you. But yeah. You see the limits of my house. Well, sheep.
There is a history of communes in many countries where you can track from their excitement and takeoff, and then the shifts, and then their abandonment, basically. And the one that's closest to what you're describing is Eritrea.
Really?
Yeah, because it was a military situation.
Right.
But China, Tanzania, Guinea, and Nicaragua, all other countries that embrace communes and whether don't really exist now.
All right, but I mean, so I've been to Nicaragua, and I had been to a refugee camp, actually in Costa Rica, right on the border with Nicaragua. Again, everything's a mixed bag. So, I mean, what's his name, Ortega? I volunteered, they didn't take me. I wanted to go there and support Ortega. He is a dictator like any other. And I mean, it's not like I'm some expert on Nicaragua, but I have been there. And it's unfortunate, but people in power tend to accumulate power, and people are still, it's not a terrible place, what I saw, I went to a few different places, but what I'm getting at is that, I think you actually said it, often the structures are set up, and then I don't know enough to say why, but there is a deterioration and a change. And the idea, going back to what you're saying, what's hopeful, is how do we find ways to sustain egalitarian and humanistic, I don't know, yeah.
Well, the other issue is that communes are different. I
Yeah.
studied communes in Tanzania.
Really?
And
Tell us.
out of 1,000, maybe 12 were actually working properly. I visited communes in China, and it was a similar situation when you got underneath. Very few were actually working properly.
Yeah.
And
How do we?
this is something you'll need to look to when you go back to Kurdistan.
No, you're
How do
absolutely.
the communes differ?
That is such a good question. I mean, I have ideals, and then I have what little experience I have. Actually, when I was 16, I hitchhiked cross country, and I went to Taos, which was a very famous commune. And you know Taos, right? And it was a disaster. And that doesn't mean, as you're saying, but there are things that work. And, so when I think of it, that's what I think of. But there was dysentery, the kids were smoking, and it was filthy, and it was like, but that's not what it's supposed to be. There was also no organization. I would imagine you have to have some kind of organization, right? It's not just whatever. I think that Tanzania, I mean, seriously, so there are working communes in places around the world. And I'm hoping that that's what I find, and I expect to find that in Rojava. I also don't know what it means when you're under attack. I don't even know what that means. I mean, what does that mean that you've got Turkey and Syria and Russia and the US pulling out and being of no use? I don't know. But I love it. And Eritrea. This is worth, for me, really looking into. That is really interesting. Yeah, wait.
Do they have any kind of a standing army? No.
Yes, well, it's not a standing army, but
tiny.
well, but very deeply effective. So in Kurdistan, in the Kurdish region of Iraq, they have their version of the Peshmerga, and the Peshmerga, who I think I'm not afraid of death, or I forget what it means, but the Peshmerga in Rojava are who defeated ISIS, are who saved the Yazidi, because the Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga retreated and did not protect those people. In fact, this is an army, or whatever it is, it's a militia is what it's called, of women and men, very much women, not just on the side, but running their own units. There's also the Asaya, which is like the police, but so there's different levels, but they have been with almost nothing, no uniforms, not much in the way of, I don't know much about artillery, but they have been enormously effective. And they're still fighting and fighting very hard. But they had US air cover, which they no longer have. And the people, and I met many people actually who were in the government or the administration, that's what it's called, in Iraqi Kurdistan, I met many representatives of Rojava and who were there to make political connections. And they said, we will fight no matter what, that no matter what Turkey throws at us, no matter what else happens, they can't succeed because this is all we have. And there's a passion that I really admire. So yes, they have an armed force, they have to. And it's been very effective. Yeah, I think it's enough, yeah.
Okay,
It's only so
so
much.
let's have a big hand for our speaker. Thank you, Becky. I do, of course, have a few announcements. We do have community input forms on the desk back there, so feel free to take them and give feedback about tonight's presentation. You can take them with you and return them at your leisure if you like. You don't have to stay here to fill them out. You have to stay here till you filled out a Valentine, though. Oh, just kidding.
her